Good morning, everyone. Yeah, you're on your own. Okay, we're in Ruth. We're at the section I have a lot of questions about and no answers to besides my own personal opinion, which you don't have to agree with, because nobody else does. What? Is it cockeyed? Even worse? Pull the right side up. Okay, Ruth chapter 3. Y'all can't read that, can you? Boop, 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 boop. How's that? That's all you get. We have the cacophony of coughing. Well, you're being supportive. It does feel dark in here, doesn't it? Why does it feel dark?
It's always this dark. That's the reason I have an electronic Bible. I can't see a Bible. It's dark.
Getting distracted already. All right, so we got Naomi. Well, if you're all going to cough, I'm not going to teach. How about that? Stop it. Get out, Kate. Okay, so Naomi is trying to set up Ruth, who is now living in Bethlehem, with her, up for success. And back in the day, the way that it would have been done is if you don't have any male children that are grown, if you don't have a father that you can turn to, if you don't have a husband that you can turn to, then you're lacking in cultural protection. And so we see that Naomi is trying to establish Ruth up in this land of Israel. And she knows that Ruth has been working in the fields with Boaz, who is the closest kinsman redeemer as far as Naomi knows. And so the plan is hatched, as you might say. Naomi's suggestion is to wash, therefore, so get rid of the mourning aspect of your society. Anoint yourself, put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. All right. Here's where I am a little bit confused. Because every single commentary I mentioned last week will say that yes, biblically and according to the Hebrew and even the English translations, to uncover one's feet, especially a man's feet, has some implications to it. But of course, this is not her trying to seduce Boaz. This is just a cultural thing that was done when you uncover one's feet. You are asking for the protection of the persons whose feet you uncover. Sounds good. Again, I mentioned last week to you briefly that my problem is I don't see anyone cite a source for that ever in a commentary. And whenever you see a bunch of people say that, well, it was a cultural symbol for back in the day, I'd love to know where they got that from. And as far as I can tell, that person said it because they heard it from somewhere too, and that person said it because they heard the same exact thing. So I don't like, personally, the fact that when you get to a thing, they say, well, that was just cultural. And then you have no evidence to back that up. I can't lean on that too much personally. And so what have you heard about this verse before? Has anyone ever heard anything about this verse before? First time in Ruth? Okay.
Just that, as well as saying the servant of said person would do that. So I guess if you felt his master's feet moving, he'd just pop right up and say, hey, God, what you need?
Okay. Again,
Which is a little weird, yeah.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense, I guess. What I was taught about this verse back at a place that's very conservative is that, well, this is a cultural thing. And so the culture of the day was if you uncover someone's feet, they will eventually stir because their feet get cold. And then they will wake up and see why their feet is cold, and there's someone there to help them. So the kind of servant thing there as well. My only problem with that is scripturally, when you talk about covering or uncovering feet, what is that a reference to? No, not clean or unclean.
The angels covering their wings, using their wings to cover their feet.
Yeah, that's a good connection. So here's what it kind of breaks down to. Why would the angels use wings to cover their feet, quote unquote? Very interesting connection there. You might remember that when King Saul is King Saul, he is jealous of David, and he tries to find out where he is, to track him down, to probably pin him against the wall with his spear. So kill the guy, right? You might recall an instance in which King Saul had to relieve himself, had to go to the bathroom, right? And he went into a cave that he thought was empty, and he, quote unquote, covered his feet to relieve himself. Everyone clear about that phraseology? Have you never read that before? Never heard that before? This is a class, you can talk. Have you read it before? Okay, so the King James especially, the one that I remember learning first, it was a very sensitive translation, because when they talk about someone relieving themselves, they're not going to use that phraseology. They're not going to say go to the bathroom or go to the toilet or the loo or whatever, right? 1611 King James. We're talking about the idea of Saul covering his feet. Now, we would talk about that in the same phraseology as your feet are covered when you go to the bathroom here, into the stalls, correct? Yeah, you go into a bathroom stall, you lock the door behind you, and then, to use this phraseology from Scripture, you cover your feet. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what is meant in the text. If you lower your pants around your feet, you're covering your feet. A very polite 1611 way to say that you are taking your pants off to go to the bathroom to relieve yourself. That's what's talked about in Scripture. When someone's feet are covered, their pants are down. That's right. So you don't want to go to war and go to a cave, and then if you're King Saul, you're covering your feet because you're relieving yourself, and then David sneaks up behind you and cuts off the corner of your tunic, right? So that's the phraseology from Scripture that we're talking about here when you have someone's feet covered or uncovered. Are their pants up or down? So the angels having wings that are flying around, two covering the face, two covering the feet, probably symptomatic of the idea that they are clothing themselves, if you will, with their own wings before the holy presence of God. So that's my issue with talking about this particular text in Ruth. Because every commentary I've read says this is a cultural symbol of a servant asking for protection of someone who is lord over them.
Which makes zero sense.
Doesn't make sense to me, because biblically, when the idea you uncover or cover someone's feet, you're talking about taking their pants off. Yeah. Welcome, Ted. So again, like I said, I've got nothing to tell you here authoritative. I've just got questions in my own personal opinion. So let's see how it shakes down, and then we'll figure out what in the world we're talking about here. Okay, and then Ruth, verse 5, says, all that you say I will do. So good plan, mother-in-law. She went down, verse 6, to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, because he's got a belly full of food and probably wine here, he went down to lie at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly, uncovered his feet, and laid down. I mean, how much did he eat? How much did he drink? So I'm taking a nap. It's been a good night. Got the harvest done. And then, verse 8, there's a gap here between verse 7 and verse 8. So some time went past. It wasn't an immediate wake-up call. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over. Now, why was he startled?
Maybe didn't want those time travel apps.
Happens to me all the time, you know.
Well, it happens to Lisa all the time. I'll just put a pin in that and keep reading before I say any more jokes. And turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. Well, who would have thought? Right? Now, if this is simply her coming over and uncovering his feet so that his feet get cold and he will eventually wake up because his feet are cold and see what's going on, I mean, I guess that makes sense, I suppose. Again, everyone says it's a cultural thing. I can't find any evidence of that. I can't. I mean, if you've got it, I want to read it. And no one has given me an authoritative source that I can say, oh, okay, this custom comes from this, and it was referenced back here in this other text that's not biblical. I get that. I'm having a hard time pinning that down. Is it the biggest deal in the world? No, it's not. It's not the main point of the text at all. But I have questions, and so I'm just being honest with you about where I'm at with my studies. I'm not sure what this is, but every other time someone's feet are covered or uncovered, we're talking about pants coming up or coming down. Okay, so there's a woman there at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant." And then here's a text. "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." We've read that phraseology before about covering someone with their wings. It can be your protection in a social way. And then the redeemer here we've referenced is the idea of a kinsman redeemer, right? We talked about that last week? Okay. And so she recognizes, hey, you are kind of next in line in the family tree here to, as the law of Moses indicated, to produce a firstborn son offspring by me to keep my husband's name alive, genealogy-wise. That's who you are to me. I would like to invoke that commandment upon you. Can you marry me and give me a child so that I can be protected in this life and keep my husband's name alive? That's kind of what the Redeemer thing was all about. And now what's his response? He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor." So let's rephrase that. How is he thinking about the situation here? First of all, it's positive. He's like, hey, that's a good thing to ask. There's some implications, though.
There's a little age difference, obviously, there.
It seems like there's an age difference, that she's not getting remarried to someone who is younger, so that would imply that Boaz is not a younger man. In this society, it wouldn't matter a whole lot, per se, besides our own personal preferences, right? And so he's thankful that she's been instructed on how that process comes about in ancient Israel through the law. Questions about that? Yeah.
I don't have a question, but obviously, as you can tell, Boaz, he did have wealth.
Yep.
But he just noticed that she wasn't in what my generation would consider a gold digger. So she's not coming after him for his money.
Yep.
So that's obviously what he sees. It's not because he's young or he has money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, he asked for God's blessing upon her because she's aware of keeping that line of succession going, the kinsman redeemer concept. And just because he's a wealthy man, that's why she came to him. Not because he's wealthy, but because he's the kinsman redeemer. And no doubt Naomi, he knew, would be instructive in that. Okay, verse 11. "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do all for you that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." I mean, this is a pretty big accolade from Boaz, because he says that all the people know what kind of person you are, what kind of character you have. We know that you followed Naomi back home to take care of her. That's a good thing, right? That loyalty we talked about before, that's a positive attribute, that you're going to take care of people that need being taken care of. You also go to a place where you have a different God than Jehovah God. And you've learned about what the law says about someone who's a stranger in the gate. So you're someone as a foreigner, but you're being treated like you were a brother, if you will, in this ancient Israel context. We also know that you're a person that will obey the agricultural laws from the law of Moses to glean that which you need for your household and for your mother-in-law. And we know that you're a hard worker and that you are now going to the proper person in the line of your family to seek protection for yourself in the future. So all those things are accolades for why Ruth is so significant. She's one of the main characters here, but again, we've got Naomi, and we've got Boaz, and we have Ruth. And through these three lenses, we get to see what this book is all about. Remember, this is before they had a king, so we have different clans and tribes and families that are taking care of the land. This is just one of those stories. Okay, and then verse 12. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. I'm the next in the family line. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. What does that mean? There is a closer relative in line of succession. So I'm not authorized by God's law of Moses to be the next one to just marry you and produce a son for you to be protected in the future. So what's he going to do? Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. I don't see anything that scandalous about verse 13. And in fact, every commentary I've ever read about this, including ones that are more recent and more critical when it comes to how they ascertain their authority, no one sees anything scandalous at all in this. So when I voice the idea about covering feet and uncovering feet, that's a personal confusion that I've got. And every single commentary that they talk about this is say, well, it's not taking his pants off, okay? Because that's not in the character of Ruth in the entire story. It'd be out of place otherwise. And I agree with that. It doesn't make sense for it to be some kind of weird thing here. But
if you look at the next verse, it kind of indicates that she didn't want everybody to know that she did that, because she was sneaking off before daylight.
isn't that weird? I don't know.
Boaz is the one. She didn't know. She wasn't
So my only caveat to, it doesn't fit the narrative here of her being such a noble, loyal, worthy woman to be redeemed. So that uncovering the feet thing it must be a cultural thing, because it wouldn't be the other one that we talked about in a previous conversation. But she's also not a Jew. She's from Moab. And so the cultural practices of how you get a husband in Moab might have been quite different. And so Naomi's suggestion of what she should do in this situation, again, I've got questions. I don't have any evidence. Besides the fact that when you read about covering or uncovering feet, and every other passage is talking about sensitive material of someone either relieving themselves or it's someone covering themselves before the holy presence of God. Those parts that are unclean, unworthy, inappropriate, right? So again, I'm confused about that. Okay, so here is the comment, verse 14. She lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known the woman came to the threshing floor. So no hanky-panky went on, and he wants to make sure that no scandal is approached here. He said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her, and she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Okay. This is English. It's not Hebrew. We're speaking English here, right? All right. Small chasing a rabbit story because I have to. So there was a particular instructor that I had who was a bit gruff, and very stern. Never saw the man smile or laugh in my entire existence of knowing this guy. And so we had chapel one morning. And so we had this gruff character at the front of the chapel. And then we had another guy who was the former president of the school that I went to walk over. And he was a jolly guy. And he knew a lot, but he was kind of like, he was very, very humble. So he walked over and said, "Hey, brother so-and-so, how'd you fare this morning?" Is how he said it. From Alabama, by the way. And he goes, "How did you fare? I don't know what that word means. It's not a proper English term." And the older former president says, "You don't know that word? That's a good Bible word right there." It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, "Well, you know the rich man and Lazarus? Well, the rich man fared sumptuously every morning." And then you've got this comment here in Ruth, "How'd you fare?" It's an English word. And that brother that was kind of gruff forgot about those passages. And so it was a big embarrassment moment for him because all the students heard that exchange go down. So whenever I see the word fair, it just brings me back to me being an 18-year-old kid and seeing the guy that everybody looked up to and being a bit gruff get shot down in the most humble way by a guy who could reference this on command. So, "How'd you fare, my daughter?" She told him all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" And talk about a verse. Don't go to your mother-in-law's house empty-handed. That was good advice back then, and I'll tell you what, it's good advice right now. Right? Oh, I'm not looking at you, Lynn. So,
Some of us don't know.
I'm just saying, some things never change, despite culture. Okay, she replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but he will settle the matter today." So Naomi knows about Boaz. He's a good dude, a bit older, got some money. He's going to do the right thing, right? So that's great. Any comments about that before we get to the legal process here? They're going to court in a minute. No, she could go back home if she wanted to. Or she could just marry somebody else if she wanted to. But the right thing, I guess, if you want to use that terminology, the ethical thing here would be for her to get married by Boaz or whoever's next in line. If she wanted the family name to continue.
It was in place to do the Redeemer thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, so,
that's the right thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah, but she could do whatever she wanted.
okay.
Yeah. Okay, chapter 4, anybody else? Thoughts?
Well, in the scriptures, Christ's lineage is attributed to Boaz, not her first husband.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's not really carrying on that family line,
Well,
his line.
yeah, but they're the same clan, same family, same lineage. So they're related very closely. So Boaz was one that brought about eventually not only a big player in like 2 generations, but also Jesus. Okay. Chapter 4, verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friends, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. So where are they? At the gate. So if you're looking for the courtroom of ancient Near East cultures, you're going to the gate of the city. Now, a couple of reasons why that would be important. What happens at the gate? No. What happens at the gate doesn't stay at the gate. Everybody knows about it, so it's not Vegas. So if you're looking at the law of Moses, these judgments of the courtroom, if you will, they weren't done in a courthouse. They were done at the gate of the city. Because if you got to stone someone to death real quick, where are you going to do it? Well, not inside the city gates. You're going to do it right outside, which would be important later for a guy that is our Lord and Savior, because he was taken outside the city gate walls of Jerusalem up to Golgotha to be executed. So this whole precedent of being set out is important. He was taken away from God's city to give his life for God's city. So the irony there can't be missed. Also, if you're at the city gates and you've got a disagreement, not only were executions kind of held there outside the city gates, but everyone who was anyone would be at the gates to see who's coming in and out. So just an idea of protection here when it comes to you as a city would be significant. So they're at the gate. You got Boaz and the other one. Verse 2, he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. What's he doing here? What's that? Making a bunch of witnesses, right? So he's got people, it's not just him and him having a private conversation. We've got people that are going to be witnessing the event so they can all testify, if needs be, what conversation took place, what decisions were reached. Okay, Mike, what size shoe do you have? 9.5. 9.5, okay. All right. It's good to know for a couple verses. He said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So she is selling her property. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it or buy it, buy it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, because there's no one besides you to redeem it or buy it, and I come after you. He said, yeah, I'll buy some property. Sure, sounds good to me. I mean, property back in the day? Yeah, I'll take some. It's all good. But Boaz said, oh, by the way, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also, by the way, acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. So remember that whole kinsman redeemer? You got to marry the next in line to keep the family name going. If you buy the land, which you want to do, you also got to buy her, because she comes with the property. Boaz says, verse 6, then the Redeemer said, you know what? Having second thoughts. I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. I've already got a really nice family line going. You know, I'd hate to kind of muddy those waters about whose property is whose. Take my right of redemption yourself, because I can't buy it. Can't buy that land. Can't do that. Don't really want to do that. It's all you, Boaz. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. Now, this, again, to me, definitely is cultural, because it says, hey, by the way, we used to do this. So the author, when he wrote this apparently was not a common practice anymore, right? So he's like, hey, remember back in the day, this is how we used to settle things. Now, if you have an agreement, if you have a discussion with someone about buying and selling back in the day, now in your world, what does that look like? Okay, so I have signed a contract here with the Thomaston Road Church of Christ. I'm your minister, if you didn't know, right? So we have a document that says here are all the conditions and terms and etc. And the elders all sign their name and I sign my name. That's a binding agreement. So if we ever have a real big issue, we can go back to the document and see what has been laid out. So we can have clear terms of communicating. Back in the day, I'm told that sometimes a handshake, a gentleman's agreement, was binding, right? Back in the day? A long time ago? I wasn't alive then, so you all got to tell me. Wasn't that long ago? Okay, well, maybe you can still do that with things that are less legal, less serious, right? You shake someone's hand, say, hey, I'll do this, and you have a binding agreement. Back in the day, a handshake wasn't enough. What'd they do? The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So you would exchange one of your sandals with the other guy to have a handshake agreement.
Hope they had the same size.
You'd hope they'd have the same. So Mike and I are making a deal here. And to confirm this deal, I'd love to shake your hand, look in the eye, but instead we're going to exchange shoes. So you got to flop around with one size 13 shoe on one foot, and I got to try to squeeze my feet into a size 9.5. It wouldn't work that much. So maybe that's why that wasn't done anymore. But that's the custom back in the day. So verse 8. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Here you go. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belongs to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." Okay, so Caitlin mentioned that we don't find necessarily Ruth and her former husband Mahlon mentioned in the line of Jesus. That's absolutely true. If you go back to Matthew chapter 1, you'll see that the offspring that comes from Ruth and Boaz is in that lineage. So if Boaz didn't redeem her and perpetuate her family name to have a son that was an offspring, then you wouldn't have Jesus. That's big picture. It was a good thing that he did that, right? There's also significantly towards the end here, somebody else. Then all who were at the gate and the elder said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be known and be renowned in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So they're all doing the wedding thing. Hey, may you be fruitful, multiply, be blessed, etc., etc. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel." We're still reading about it 3,000 years later, so yeah, pretty good deal, right? "He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." That phraseology, "who is more to you than 7 sons," the number 7 there is just the idea of completeness or perfection, right? 7 in the Bible is kind of code. If you remember the first couple of chapters of 1 Samuel, you've got Samuel's mom who has not had a child, and then you've got the husband saying, "And I more to you than 7 sons?" And she's like, "Dude, no, I want a son." So you have a man putting his foot in his mouth, which I just love because some things never change. Okay, so Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. She took care of her grandbaby. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." And they named him Obed. Cool, but even cooler than that, he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Snap. Now we know that being in the genealogy of Jesus for us is really, really cool. But if you are reading this and you're like, who cares? Who cares about Ruth and Boaz and Naomi? Why do we care about this at all? Because this is the great-grandmother of King David, which is really cool. Because not only is this showing us where David came from, like some hot gossip from back in his great-grandmother's day, right? But also, it gives us, as the reader in this generation, some insight into when this book was written. Right? So, logically, if no one cares or knows about David, they won't care or know about Jesse, they won't care or know about Obed, they won't care or know about Ruth and Boaz, right? So when this was written, David was a known guy. the author of this said, you know David's family tree? You want some insight into how David came to be? Well, this is it. So interesting, we have a kind of a stamp of when this was penned. Because at the beginning of the book, remember, they said, back in the day, when there was no kings, there was only judges. Remember that whole situation? So they had kings when this thing was written. And probably David was the king. And they were trying to establish the story to kind of show us his lineage and what this is all about. So, verse 18. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon, which is hard to say because English, that's salmon right there, right? Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. Jesse fathered David. Boom. Now, if you love verses 18 through 22, just wait until you read Matthew chapter 1. You're going to love it. So you got them going all the way back to Perez here for the genealogy. Okay, Book of Ruth. What are your thoughts?
How much does Satan know about the seed line?
All right, talk about coming out of left field. All right, talking about David. Hey, Satan, what about him?
Well, all he had to do was knock off Ruth somehow. I mean, right? Get her married some dumb guy.
I mean, yeah, if you take care of Ruth, you don't get Obed, you don't get Jesse, you don't get David. Yeah, eventually you don't get Jesus.
Did he have intimate knowledge? I mean, he's kind of ignorant on a lot of stuff. But
I'd be concerned about that statement right there.
well, he's a ruler of the world, you know.
Yeah. If you thought, okay, here, that's the perfect segue question, because all you have to do is just take out one guy or one girl, and you've got the seed line of the Messiah taken care of. Well, you know what's even better than that if you're Satan? Let's just kill all the Jews real quick. Like the book of Esther, which is next. Definitely not. Because there was a woman in the way who, again, for the second time, establishes and protects and maintains the seed line of the Messiah being born. Ruth did it here with Boaz, and then you got the book of Esther, which is next.
Well, just kill them on the cross, and that'll fix everything.
Yeah, if you just kill them all, you're good.
I mean, he's always showing up for the scripture, so, you know.
Well, he knows it. Doesn't apply it. All right? Okay. All right, folks, that's Ruth. Simple, small, 4-chapter book that shows us how we got King David, how eventually we get Jesus. We see that loyalty is above all when it comes to the family unit. Kate?
When does this canonically happen in our history? Like,
When was it written?
when did Ruth live?
What about the dates?
Yeah, like,
The dates was, I can ballpark it. It's probably, well, definitely 4 generations before they had a king. So before Samuel did Samuel stuff, he was the last judge. So before Samuel was here, you had Ruth. Then you had Obed, then you had Jesse, then you had David, right? So before 1 Samuel. At the end of, or in the middle of the book of Judges is like when Ruth took place. Okay, one more thing.
What I found interesting about Ruth and what I really liked was that Ruth was a Moabite and Boaz was a Jew. And while that's necessary, on down the line, you have Jesus, which is a Jew, and we the Gentiles, and how we all became together as one. So I see the contrast here and what we're going to see in the New Testament.
Yeah, there's a lot of predictive prophecy and the desire of God to not just be exclusive to Israel, but that they would be a beacon of light to show who God is to all the nations. To all the nations in the prophets is significant. Okay, we'll pause here for the morning. And we'll be dismissed for about 20 minutes before worship begins. Next week, we're going to introduce the book of Esther. If you've not read it before, I'm sure most of you have, but if you've not read it before, it's something else. I mean, it's like Shakespeare before Shakespeare was Shakespeare, right? This is an epic story, theatrical narrative of intertwining of people's desire and their plans and all that. Esther is a roller coaster ride. It reads more like a novel to me than any other book of the Bible. Okay, we'll pause here for the morning. Thank you for your time and your attention. We'll be dismissed.